There's this uncomfortable truth that people seem unwilling to talk about anymore. It's taboo, it's controversial, but it's also real, and it's wreaking havoc quietly underneath the surface of our modern lives. We're told that we're more connected than ever, yet people are lonelier than they've ever been. We have dating apps, instant messaging, endless access to stimulation. But what are we lacking? Intimacy. Meaningful connection, physical presence, sexual union, and here's the thing, the less you engage in real sexual connection, the more it starts to erode you psychologically, emotionally, biologically. It's not just about pleasure, it's about integration of your psyche, your identity, your place in the world, because sex isn't just a recreational activity, it's a ritual of trust, it's a foundation for psychological wholeness. And when you remove that from people's lives, especially young men, you don't get strength or independence or freedom, you get alienation, you get resentment, you get chaos, and so today I want to talk to you about that. About how the absence of sex in your life isn't just a gap in experience, it's a slow, corrosive force that shapes who you are and who you're becoming. Sexual intimacy is far more than just a physical act. It is an embodied expression of connection, trust, and mutual vulnerability. In many ways, it is a ritual, an ancient one, that binds individuals together not just physically, but emotionally and psychologically. In a society increasingly fragmented by technology, alienation, and ideological confusion, we often reduce sex to something transactional or purely hedonistic. But such a reduction is dangerous, because it strips the act of its profound psychological implications. Sexual intimacy, especially in a committed relationship, helps orient individuals toward wholeness, toward the integration of self and other, and toward the confrontation of the chaos that lies both within and without. To understand why this is so critical, you must consider what it means to be psychologically integrated. The psyche in Jungian terms is not a unified, static entity. It's a dynamic structure constantly negotiating between competing internal forces, desire and discipline, chaos and order, vulnerability and control. Sexual intimacy serves as a crucible for this negotiation. When two people engage in a sexual relationship that is based on mutual respect and care, they are participating in a deeply symbolic and experiential process. They are saying, essentially, I am willing to be seen fully, naked in body and in soul. That's not trivial, that's transformative. In being seen and accepted in such a vulnerable state, an individual begins to piece together disparate elements of the self, body, mind, and emotion, into a coherent whole. This is why sex in a meaningful context can reduce anxiety, bolster self-esteem, and deepen the capacity for empathy. It aligns the body's impulses with the psyche's longing for connection. It makes a person feel real, anchored in the physical world, but in a way that is saturated with significance. It gives form to love, to trust, to the ineffable sense that you are not alone. And when such integration occurs consistently, it strengthens the scaffolding of identity. It reinforces that you are worthy of connection, that you can give and receive love, and that you are not merely a biological machine chasing dopamine. On the biological level, sexual intimacy releases a cascade of hormones, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, that not only induce pleasure but also foster bonding and attachment. These are not random neurochemical events. They are evolution's way of reinforcing behaviors that are essential to human flourishing. Oxytocin, often called the love hormone, promotes trust and bonding. In the context of repeated intimate encounters, it helps solidify long-term attachments. That's not just useful for reproductive purposes, it's essential for psychological stability, because we're not built to go through life entirely alone. We are social creatures, deeply embedded in networks of connection, and the most intense of those networks are sexual and romantic in nature. Without sexual intimacy, or when sex becomes divorced from its deeper meaning, people begin to fragment. You see this in the rise of what some have called sexual nihilism, a state in which people engage in sex purely for immediate gratification, without any regard for the psychological or emotional consequences. The problem isn't just the act itself, it's that such experiences fail to integrate the individual. In fact, they often do the opposite. They promote detachment, cynicism, and in the worst cases, a kind of self-loathing. Because when you give your body but not your soul, you begin to dissociate the two, and the more that split widens, the harder it becomes to feel whole. On the other hand, when sexual intimacy is approached with reverence, yes, reverence, it becomes a vehicle for transformation. It allows individuals to confront their fears of rejection, their insecurities, their longing to be loved and accepted. It offers a space where you can be imperfect, exposed, and yet still embraced. That kind of experience has profound implications for mental health. It calms the nervous system, grounds the self in relational safety, and fosters a kind of embodied mindfulness. You are here, you are known, you are not fragmented. There is also a spiritual dimension to this. For millennia, religious traditions have placed sexuality within sacred frameworks, not because they feared it, as is often claimed, but because they understood its power. They knew that sexual union could be both creative and destructive. It could bind two souls or break them, and they sought to direct that power toward union, toward covenant, toward responsibility. That might seem outdated in a culture obsessed with autonomy and pleasure, but the psychological insight still holds. Unregulated sexual behavior, detached from meaning, leads not to freedom but to disintegration. True freedom comes when the act serves something greater than the self. Love, commitment, the building of a life together. In therapeutic settings, you'll often find that patients suffering from anxiety, depression, or trauma have deeply fraught relationships with their own sexuality. They may feel shame, numbness, or confusion about their desires. Helping them reclaim a healthy sexual self is not just about improving their romantic relationships. It's about helping them become whole, because sexuality is not an add-on to the human experience, it's central to it. It's where identity, biology, emotion, and relationship converge. To deny or ignore, that is to deny a major dimension of what it means to be human. Furthermore, sexual intimacy requires a kind of moral development. It demands honesty, communication, boundaries, and care. You can't sustain intimacy, real intimacy, without those things, so in engaging in it meaningfully, individuals develop character. They learn to take responsibility not just for their own pleasure, but for the well-being of another. They learn empathy, patience, and sometimes sacrifice, and these are precisely the virtues needed for a stable self and a stable society. All of this is to say, sexual intimacy is not optional in the psychological sense. You can live without it, yes, but you cannot ignore its absence without consequence. The less you engage with it meaningfully, the more you risk disconnection from others, from yourself, from life. And that disconnection breeds apathy, confusion, and in extreme cases, despair. We are built to touch and be touched, not just skin to skin, but soul to soul, and when that is missing, we feel it, deeply, painfully, often silently. So when I say that sexual intimacy is a cornerstone of psychological integration, I mean that it is one of the few arenas left in modern life where the physical and the spiritual, the emotional and the relational, come together in one act. One moment, one union, and that union, when honored, can shape the very core of who we are. There's a deep psychological cost that comes from long-term sexual deprivation, one that modern culture rarely talks about openly. We live in an age of paradox. Hypersexualized imagery floods our screens, yet many individuals, especially young men, go months, even years, without meaningful physical intimacy. This isn't just a lifestyle choice for many. It's an unspoken, often painful reality. And over time, this chronic lack of sexual connection begins to shape the psyche in ways that are subtle at first, but become profound and sometimes corrosive. When someone goes without sex for a long period, especially when it's not by choice, it begins to affect how they see themselves and others. The human mind is not a detached intellect floating in space, it's a socially embedded, emotionally wired organism. Our self-perception is inextricably linked to how others respond to us, especially in areas as fundamental as attraction, affection, and intimacy. When those responses are absent, when a person begins to feel invisible, undesired, or unworthy, the mind doesn't stay neutral. It begins to compensate, and it does so in ways that can lead to deep resentment, loneliness, and an erosion of identity. Resentment is one of the first emotional byproducts of chronic sexual deprivation. And it's not always directed outward, as is often assumed. In fact, it usually starts inward, with self-blame. What's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? These are the thoughts that begin to echo quietly in the minds of those who feel chronically excluded from intimate relationships. Over time, these thoughts compound into narratives. Narratives that say, I am broken, or worse, the world is rigged against me. This kind of internal dialogue doesn't foster growth. It breeds bitterness. As this inner resentment grows, it often begins to turn outward. People start projecting their frustration onto others, potential partners, society, even friends. They start to see connection as something others hoard or gatekeep, something denied to them by a cruel, indifferent world. In some cases, this morphs into a cynical view of human relationships altogether. Love becomes a lie, sex becomes a power game, vulnerability is seen as weakness, and that bitterness begins to calcify. The walls go up, the soul closes in, but before resentment takes its full shape, isolation is usually the dominant experience. Long-term sexual deprivation isolates a person, not just physically, but emotionally. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from not being touched, from not being desired, from not being known in a deeply intimate way. This isn't the loneliness of simply not having friends or being at a party alone. This is existential loneliness. It's the feeling that no one sees the most human, most vulnerable part of you, and that kind of loneliness doesn't just hurt, it disorients. Touch is one of the earliest forms of communication we experience as infants. It tells us we are safe, we are loved, we are real. Remove that for long enough in adulthood, and the psychological ground starts to shift. People begin to drift into numbness, sometimes depression. They begin to lose the sense that they matter, not just as minds, but as embodied beings. They stop investing in themselves, stop caring about their appearance, their posture, their energy, because somewhere inside they've started to believe the lie that no one will ever want them anyway. And then, very often, identity confusion follows. Who am I, if no one desires me, if I've never held someone's gaze in the dark, if I've never been pulled closer in love or lust, if I've only known rejection or indifference? Sexuality is a key component of identity. Not the only one, but a vital one. And when that dimension of life is absent or unacknowledged for long enough, the self begins to fragment. People become unsure of what they even want. They may become hyper, fixated on fantasies, turn to pornography compulsively, or retreat into abstract ideologies or online echo chambers that validate their pain without offering any real path forward. And while these coping mechanisms may offer temporary relief, they deepen the confusion. They feed a version of self that is disconnected from the real world, from real people with real eyes and real hearts. So the individual, now fragmented and withdrawn, begins to inhabit a shadow version of life, one that runs on scripts and illusions, not truth, not growth. And the tragedy here is not just that people are suffering, it's that they start to believe this is all there is, that this is their fate. Society does little to help. In fact, it often makes things worse. Men who express these struggles are frequently met with ridicule or are told to man up. Women in similar positions are shamed or pathologized. There's very little room for honest conversation about what long-term sexual deprivation actually does to a human being, how it warps their sense of self, how it starves their need for connection, how it can lead to deep emotional paralysis. We throw around slogans like "you don't need a partner to be whole," and while that might be true in some philosophical sense, it denies the biological, emotional, and relational reality of human existence. We are made for connection. Intimacy is not a luxury, it's a psychological necessity, and it's not just about sex either. It's about what sex represents: acceptance, mutual desire, vulnerability reciprocated. When that's missing, the person begins to lose trust, not just in others, but in themselves. They doubt their instincts, their appearance, their worth. They start to dissociate from their own desires because wanting something they can't have becomes too painful. So they pretend they don't want it, but the body knows, the soul knows, and the dissonance grows. This is why chronic sexual deprivation is not just a private issue, it's a cultural one. When large swaths of the population are quietly suffering in isolation, feeling disconnected from one of the most fundamental aspects of human life, the consequences ripple outward. You get men and women who are increasingly bitter, increasingly detached, increasingly unable to form or maintain relationships. You get spikes in anxiety, depression, aggression. You get people turning to extremes, ideological, emotional, even violent extremes, because they are trying to make sense of a pain that has no name in the public discourse, and the answer is not shame. The answer is not to tell people to just go out and get laid, as if it were that simple. The answer is to create a culture where connection is possible again, where people learn how to relate, how to communicate, how to carry themselves with confidence and integrity, where sexual intimacy is respected, not degraded, where individuals are taught to pursue meaning, not just stimulation, and where those who suffer in silence are given a voice, not to complain, but to understand, to grow, and to reclaim their dignity. Because at the core of this issue is something heartbreakingly simple: the human need to be known, to be wanted, to be touched, not just physically, but soulfully, and when that need goes unmet for too long, the cost is far greater than we imagine. It isn't just loneliness, it's the slow unraveling of the self. In the modern world, we are more digitally connected than at any other point in human history. With just a few swipes, we can send messages across the globe, share our thoughts with thousands, and scroll through endless feeds of smiling faces, curated bodies, and filtered lives. But despite this overwhelming flood of connectivity, something essential is being lost. We are starving for genuine human intimacy while drowning in digital noise. And perhaps most tragically, many don't even realize what they're missing, because the illusions of connection are now so powerful that they've become substitutes for the real thing. Social media platforms, dating apps, virtual games, and pornographic content all offer a simulation of intimacy. They mimic attention, interaction, and even affection. A like on a photo, a heart on a message, a swipe right, it all creates the temporary illusion that we are being seen and acknowledged, but these are micro hits of recognition, not connection. They stimulate the same neurochemical systems that respond to real social engagement: dopamine surges, brief excitement, emotional anticipation. But they never satisfy the deeper, embodied need for presence, touch, eye contact, shared silence, or emotional vulnerability. They light up the brain without feeding the soul. One of the most insidious effects of these distractions is that they convince us we are connected when we are, in truth, profoundly alone. We've traded real conversations for comment sections, affection for emojis, sexual energy for pixelated fantasy, and while all of these things may provide momentary relief from boredom or loneliness, they erode our capacity for genuine human interaction. People begin to forget how to relate. They become awkward, defensive, insecure, or avoidant in real life, because they've spent too long in environments where they could control every word, every angle, every impression. When the majority of our social engagement takes place in digital spaces, we stop taking emotional risks. We don't reveal our true selves. We present curated versions of ourselves, highlights, not the whole film. And in doing so, we lose the feedback that helps us grow. We miss the micro expressions in someone's eyes when we say something awkward, the body language that tells us when someone's truly engaged or bored, the nervous excitement of a shared moment that can't be edited or replayed. Those are the very moments where confidence is built, empathy is born, and connection is made. Without them, we remain locked in abstraction. For many, especially those who feel isolated, these digital alternatives become a kind of emotional pacifier. Porn becomes a stand-in for intimacy, online debates become stand-ins for real dialogue, a dating app match becomes a stand-in for actual attraction, but none of these interactions demand the full presence of the individual. They don't challenge us to grow, to listen deeply, to compromise, to risk rejection, or to become worthy of trust. They keep us safe, but small, comfortable, but disconnected, stimulated, but unsatisfied. It's no surprise, then, that rates of loneliness, depression, and anxiety are rising, even among those who appear socially active online, because the body and psyche know the difference between a glowing screen and a glowing face. We can trick our brains temporarily, but the soul keeps score. You can watch as many romantic movies as you like, follow all the beautiful people on Instagram, and engage in online flirtation. But at the end of the night, if no one truly knows you, if no one's voice has touched your chest, if no one's hand has met yours in a moment of mutual longing, remain fundamentally untouched, and that untouched feeling, that sense of existing behind glass, starts to hollow people out. They start confusing stimulation with intimacy, novelty with connection, and visibility with love. But attention is not affection, popularity is not belonging, and scrolling through 1,000 faces is not the same as sitting across from one person who truly sees you. The longer we live in the digital mirage, the more we forget how thirsty we are for something real. This also affects our capacity for sexual connection. People increasingly report feeling disconnected during sex, even when they're with a partner. Why? Because their expectations, shaped by digital content, have replaced presence with performance. They're acting out what they've seen, rather than being present in the moment. They're chasing stimulation, not offering themselves, and this creates a subtle dissonance, where bodies may be close, but minds and hearts remain worlds apart. The sex may be technically correct, but spiritually hollow, and again, the individual leaves the encounter more fragmented than before. The irony is that many people think they are sexually liberated now because they have access to everything. Every kink, every body type, every fantasy, but access does not equal connection. In fact, unlimited access often devalues the experience itself. When everything is available instantly, we don't have to earn it, cultivate it, or grow into the kind of person who is worthy of it. We become consumers, not lovers, and love, real love, requires transformation. It requires presence. It requires becoming. Our devices are not evil. Technology is not inherently the problem. But when it becomes the dominant medium through which we try to meet our deepest human needs, intimacy, connection, belonging, it begins to betray us. It promises convenience, but at the cost of depth. It offers speed, but at the cost of patience. It gives us control, but at the cost of vulnerability. And vulnerability, uncomfortable as it is the gateway to love. Without it, we can't truly be seen. If we are to reclaim our capacity for meaningful connection, we must begin by recognizing where we've settled for imitations. We must become aware of how easily we numb our longing with scrolling, how often we avoid loneliness with distraction, and how readily we substitute stimulation for closeness. Then, with humility, we must begin to step back into the world of real people. We must risk awkward conversations, face-to-face interaction, slow courtship, and emotional honesty. We must retrain our nervous systems to tolerate closeness, not just from behind a screen, but in the flesh. Because at the heart of the human condition is the desire to be known and loved, not as a profile, not as a brand, but as a whole person. That is what digital distractions so often obscure. They give us endless information, endless stimulation, but little wisdom and almost no intimacy. And until we learn to distinguish between what feels like connection and what actually is connection, we will remain lost in the glow, hungry, unseen, and quietly aching for a human touch we've almost forgotten how to ask for. To grow into a fully developed human being means learning how to relate to yourself on every level. Mentally, emotionally, physically, and yes, sexually. And while the world often treats sexuality as either a playground or a battlefield, in truth it's something far more sacred, more complex. Reconnecting with your sexuality is not simply about having more sex, nor is it about chasing pleasure for its own sake. It is about integration. It is about becoming whole. It is about learning to fully inhabit your body, your desires, and your vulnerabilities with honesty and dignity. Many people go through life estranged from their sexuality without even realizing it. They bury it under shame, fear, trauma, repression, distraction, or sheer neglect. Others overindulge in sexual behavior that is disconnected from emotional meaning, confusing compulsion with freedom. Both extremes are symptoms of the same root issue, a disconnect between one's sexual energy and one's deeper self. In both cases, sex is not something lived and owned. It is something either feared or misused. And when something so powerful and foundational is cut off from the core of who you are, the result is fragmentation. You cannot become fully yourself while denying or distorting the part of you that longs for intimacy, connection, and embodied expression. Sexuality is not just about what you do with another person. It's about how you relate to your own body, your own desires, your own sense of masculine or feminine energy, whatever that may mean for you. It's about knowing how to listen to your instincts without being ruled by them. It's about understanding the difference between impulse and longing, between fantasy and fulfillment. It's about being able to look yourself in the mirror and not flinch when desire surfaces, not rush to hide it, and not rush to gratify it either, but to hold it, explore it, honor it. For many, this kind of reconnection begins not with a partner, but in solitude. It starts with turning down the noise, the pornography, the distractions, the endless comparisons, and sitting quietly with your own physicality. To simply be in your body without judgment is an act of courage for some. To admit you want love, to admit you want sex, to admit you want to be touched and seen and held, that's vulnerable, that's real, and that's where healing begins, when you stop pretending that you're above it all. When you stop numbing it or exploiting it, when you start listening, what you'll often find beneath the surface of numbness or overactivity is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy, fear of being too much or not enough. Maybe there were early experiences that taught you your body was something to be ashamed of. Maybe you learned to hide yourself to feel safe. Maybe you used sex as a weapon or a shield. Or maybe you just shut that part of yourself off, hoping no one would notice. But the truth is, your sexuality doesn't disappear, it waits. It waits in the shadows, quietly asking for integration. And when it's left alone too long, it can become distorted, hungry, reactive, or depressed. It wants to be seen, not exploited or shamed, but seen. Reclaiming this part of yourself is not a one-time revelation. It's a process of learning to be honest, curious, and gentle. It's about creating the kind of inner safety where your desire is not an enemy, but a guide. Where you don't have to hide what you want, and you don't have to chase after it recklessly either. You can simply acknowledge it, learn from it. Let it teach you something about where you are, what you value, and how you long to be known. Because at its healthiest, sexual energy is not selfish, it is connective. It seeks union, not conquest. It invites vulnerability, not control. There is a certain depth of maturity that only comes when you have wrestled with your own sexuality and emerged with a kind of peace. Not perfect control, not absolute mastery, but peace. A calm knowing that you can handle what you feel, that you don't need to numb it or act on it compulsively, that you can choose, that you are not ruled by your body, but you are also not divorced from it. This is what it means to integrate, to become a human being who does not split themselves into fragments, mind here, body there, soul forgotten in between, but someone who inhabits all parts of themselves with responsibility and grace. And yes, this process does often extend into relationships. As you become more whole in yourself, you begin to relate to others differently. Sex is no longer a transaction or a performance. It becomes a form of mutual revelation. A space where two people bring not just their bodies, but their histories, their hopes, their fears, and in that space, you are no longer hiding, you are showing up. That kind of intimacy is rare, not because people don't want it, but because many haven't done the work to hold it. They haven't faced themselves yet. They're still at war with their own longing, and so they either avoid real connection or sabotage it. Reconnection doesn't mean acting out every desire you feel. It doesn't mean becoming a slave to sensation. It means becoming someone who understands desire well enough to channel it, contain it, express it, or set it aside with intention. It means seeing sexuality not as a problem to solve or a temptation to resist, but as a natural and potentially beautiful part of what makes you human. And more than that, it becomes a source of energy, creativity, and deep connection when it's no longer buried in shame or distorted by denial. Modern culture tends to push extremes. On one end, hypersexualization that reduces people to bodies. On the other, prudish denial that shames any erotic impulse as something dirty or dangerous. But the mature human path lies in neither extreme. It lies in integration, in learning to own your sexuality with dignity, to bring it into alignment with your values, to let it inform your life, not dominate it, not disappear from it, but inform it quietly and powerfully, like a current running just beneath the surface, guiding you toward truth, toward contact, toward love. To become fully yourself, you cannot leave your sexuality behind. You must take it with you, refine it, reconcile with it, and allow it to be part of your story. Not the whole story, but a vital one. A chapter that speaks to your aliveness, your longing, and your capacity to connect with another person in ways that are real, mutual, and meaningful. And when you do, when you stand in that place of integrated desire, you will not need to prove anything. You will not need to perform, you will simply be. And that, paradoxically, is when connection becomes most possible, because you are no longer fragmented, you are no longer hiding, you are fully human, imperfect, open, alive.